When you hear Mongol Empire, what do you picture? Horses. Arrows.conquest. A war machine so terrifying that entire cities surrendered just at the rumor of their approach. That's the story history gave you. But here's what history forgot to mention. At its peak, the Mongol Empire controlled more land than any empire in human history. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the doorstep of Europe. 33 million square kilometers. 1/4 of the entire Earth's landmass under a single banner. But land wasn't their greatest achievement. Connection was. What the Mongols actually built, between the wars, between the campaigns, in the dust of everything they conquered, was the world's first global economy. They were, in every meaningful way, the internet of the 13th century. And just like every technology that moves too fast, too far, too soon, they crashed. This is the story of how they built it and how they broke it. Let's go back to the beginning. The year is 1206. A man named Temujin, a man who started with nothing, not even a horse of his own, has just unified the warring tribes of the Mongolian steppe. History will remember him as Genghis Khan. And his first great act wasn't a battle, it was a network. Genghis understood something that no ruler of his era truly grasped. Information is power, and speed is everything, so he built the YAM. The YAM, the world's first high-speed communication network. Every 20 to 30 miles across the entire empire, a relay station. Fresh horses, fresh riders, food, shelter, always ready. A message placed in the hands of a YAM rider in Beijing could reach Persia in days. Not weeks, not months, days. To put that in perspective, in medieval Europe, news traveled at the speed of a tired horse in a muddy road. In the Mongol Empire, news traveled at the speed of a system, a living, breathing network designed for one purpose, to make distance disappear. Think of it like the Pony Express, but covering a continent. Think of it like early broadband, unreliable to outsiders, but lightning fast for those inside the network. And if you were one of the riders, you carried something extraordinary, the golden tablet. A golden tablet. The Mongols called it a pizza, pure gold stamped with the Khan's seal. It was the 13th century equivalent of a federal badge, a priority boarding pass, and a diplomatic passport, all in one. Villages had to feed you. Officials had to step aside. Soldiers had to let you pass. You were the network, and the network moved. Information became the empire's greatest weapon, not the sword. Stealing genius? The world's first talent pipeline. But here's where the real genius kicks in. Genghis Khan was smart enough to know what he didn't know. He was a master of the steppe. He was not a master of economics, of engineering, of medicine, or of administration. So he did something radical for a conqueror. He hired his enemies. Conquered cities weren't plundered for treasure and left to rot. They were plundered for talent. Engineers from China, tax administrators from Persia, astronomers from the Islamic world, doctors from everywhere. The Mongol court became the most remarkable cross-pollination of human genius the medieval world had ever seen. It was, in a very real sense, the world's first talent pipeline. A brutal Silicon Valley, where the price of admission was conquest, but the output was civilization-altering innovation. And the greatest innovation of all, it didn't come from a battlefield. It came from a printing press. Printing, imagine you're a merchant in the year 1260. You want to travel from the Chinese coast all the way to Persia. Normally, this would mean carrying enormous amounts of gold and silver, heavy, dangerous, a target on your back for every bandit between here and there. Now imagine someone hands you a piece of paper, not just any paper. Paper made from the bark of the mulberry tree, stamped with the imperial seal of the great Khan. And they tell you, this is worth 1,000 taels of silver. Any merchant, any official, anywhere in this empire, they will accept this. Or they will face the consequences, the Chao, the world's first government-issued paper currency. The Chinese had experimented with paper money for centuries. But what Kublai Khan did, the grandson of Genghis, was something different. He made it mandatory. You couldn't trade across the empire without it. Silver and gold handed over to the state. What you got back was paper, and it worked. Because within the borders of the Mongol Empire, and those borders were enormous, there was essentially one currency, one legal system of commerce, and one guarantee of safety. For the first time in human history, a merchant could travel from the Pacific to the Mediterranean without changing currencies, paying a dozen different tolls, or bribing a dozen different officials. It was, by any modern definition, a free trade zone the size of a continent. Marco Polo, who walked through this system firsthand, described it as alchemy. And he wasn't wrong. They had turned bark into gold, not through chemistry, not through magic, through the most powerful force in all of economics, trust. The Chao had value because the empire said it did, and the empire had the power to enforce that promise. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, was real. Trade surged, cities grew wealthy. Knowledge and goods flowed east and west at speeds the ancient world couldn't have dreamed of. The Mongol Empire wasn't just a military superpower. It was the engine of a medieval globalization boom. But here's the thing about economic booms built on trust. The moment you break that trust, everything falls apart. By the 1270s, Kublai Khan ruled the greatest empire the world had ever seen. He had everything, and that was exactly the problem. Because when you have everything, When every advisor tells you that you are invincible, you start to believe it. And Kublai Khan wanted more. The invasions begin Vietnam, Burma, Java, Korea. Campaign after campaign after campaign, each one stretching the empire's treasury further, each one returning with less than promised. And then came Japan twice. Kublai Khan launched 2 massive naval invasions of Japan, 1274 and 1281. The combined Mongol fleet, one of the largest armadas ever assembled in the ancient world, set sail toward the Japanese islands. And both times, the same thing happened. The kamikaze, the divine wind, typhoons. Not one. 2 catastrophic typhoons in 2 separate invasions, each one swallowing hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of men. The Japanese called them kamikaze, divine winds sent by the gods to protect their islands. But in the accounting ledgers of the Mongol treasury, they had another name, catastrophic loss. 2 failed invasions. Entire fleets built at enormous expense, crewed by hundreds of thousands, simply gone. And Kublai Khan refused to stop. He was planning a 3rd invasion of Japan when he died. The wars never paid for themselves. Not in Japan, not in Vietnam, not anywhere. And to fund them, Kublai turned to the one tool his treasury still had. The printing press. Print more Chao, more paper. More currency, more promises. It felt like a solution. It looked like money. It carried the imperial seal. But there was a fatal flaw. The same fatal flaw that has destroyed every government that has tried this trick, from ancient Rome to 20th century Weimar Germany to today. You can print money. You can't print value. When you flood a market with currency without increasing the actual goods and services that currency can buy, food, silk, iron, horses, you don't create wealth. You dilute it, prices rise. The purchasing power of every note in every merchant's pocket quietly, invisibly, shrinks. Economists call it demand-pull inflation. Medieval merchants just called it panic. Trust is not a resource you can manufacture. It is built slowly, over decades, through consistency and reliability and the lived experience of a promise kept, and it is destroyed fast. The moment merchants across the empire started to doubt the Chao, the moment the first whispers spread that the paper in your pocket might not buy what it bought last year, the entire system began to shake. The Pax Mongolica was ending, not with a battle, with a loss of faith. Think about what that means, practically. The entire global trade network of the 13th century, the caravans on the Silk Road, the sea merchants in the Indian Ocean, the nomadic traders connecting east to west, it all ran on one thing, the guarantee that Mongol currency meant something. Once that guarantee started to crack, trade slowed, routes were abandoned, cities that had grown fat on commerce began to hollow out. The internet of the 13th century was losing its signal. And then came the final blow, the one nobody could have engineered, the one that didn't come from a treasury or a battlefield or a failed invasion. It came from the trade routes themselves. 1347, the Black Death, the same network that had made the Mongol Empire's prosperity possible, the relay stations, the caravans, the seamless flow of people and goods across the continent, became the perfect highway for the most devastating pandemic in human history. The bubonic plague traveled the Silk Road like a dark passenger on every caravan, in every port, through every city. In some regions, it erased 1/3 of the population. In others, more. And with the people went the commerce. With the commerce went the tax revenue. With the revenue went the empire's ability to maintain its roads, its relay stations, its armies, its promises. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it pulled the plug on a dying economy. The Chao, once the symbol of Mongol economic genius, became worthless confetti. Merchants refused it. Officials couldn't enforce it. The printing presses that were supposed to solve the problem had only accelerated the collapse. Within a generation, the greatest economic zone the medieval world had ever known had fractured into smaller, weaker, suspicious successor states, each one hoarding what little was left, each one retreating from the grand experiment of connection. The Pax Mongolica was over, and the world it had created, briefly, brilliantly, went with it. Here's what's remarkable about the story of the Mongol economic empire. It wasn't destroyed by a stronger army. It wasn't conquered by a smarter civilization. It was a victim of its own success and its own hubris. They built a system of such extraordinary complexity, such radical interdependence, that when the trust holding it together began to erode, there was no wall to hide behind. No fortress strong enough, no cavalry fast enough. The same openness that made the boom possible made the bust catastrophic. Sound familiar? Every time a government has printed its way out of a crisis, it has faced the same reckoning. Every time a network has expanded faster than the trust that holds it together, the collapse has followed. Every time ego has overruled the accountants, when the wars that should not have been fought were funded by promises that could not be kept, the result has been the same. The paper runs out of meaning before it runs out of ink. You can print money, you can't print value. The Mongols taught us this lesson in the 13th century. We are still learning it today. If you made it this far, you already understand something most people don't. The most powerful empires in history were never built on force alone. They were built on systems, on trust, on the audacious idea that the world works better connected than divided. The Mongols proved it. 2 lessons. One empire. History is the best economics teacher you've never paid for. If this made you think differently about history or economics, hit subscribe.